Good morning. As Pastor Sarah said, I'm Dave Birdsall, one of the lay preachers here at Prince of Peace. So we're giving Pastor Sarah a little vacation after her week off having fun with the church-wide folks in Phoenix. So this is another installment in our summer series on Holy Disruptors. Today's Holy Disruptor is Dorothy Day. Now, how many of you here have heard of Dorothy Day before? Show of hands. Well, actually, a few of you. Yeah, more than I expected. I hadn't heard of her before I was assigned this sermon, so this is all new to me. Now, another question, more provocative perhaps. Raise your hand. How many people here are capitalists? All right, quite a few, right? I once had a Facebook exchange with Ryan Roberts, one of our former interns here. I claimed that we were capitalists because both of us own stocks or shares in a mutual fund. This is what capitalists do, right? We lend our capital so that someone else can use it to fund a business. Ryan demurred. No, this is not enough. A capitalist is one who controls industry, not only by lending funds, but by sitting on corporate boards. Now, I don't know which of us is right. Maybe we both are. I bring this up because to understand Dorothy Day's journey, we need to understand some economic and political terms that were current in her time. So let's do a quick history talk. The 1890s through the 1930s were a time of transition in the United States. The 1890s were the Gilded Age, dominated by wealthy industrialists. Think Morgan and Carnegie and Rockefeller. The factory workers were an underclass of white and black rural folk moving to the cities, and immigrants mainly from Eastern and Southern Europe. There was extreme income inequality. The Rockefellers enjoyed their mansions while their laborers lived in shabby tenements and flop houses. The labor movement began to have some momentum, and conditions began to improve. Teddy Roosevelt broke up some of the trusts. Child labor laws were passed, but business cycles were still extreme, and at the end of this period, the country had entered the Great Depression. There was a great struggle of ideas of what a just economic situation would look like. Laissez-faire capitalism suggested that society was most efficient when the markets ruled without interference. Progressives thought that government must break up the monopolies. Socialists desired that workers should own the means of production. They were making the product. Shouldn't they receive the benefits? Syndicalists, now there's a word you probably haven't heard before, believed that the path to a just society lay in the power of unions and the general strike. Anarchists claimed that the state and industrial power were a great evil and longed for small-scale communal society. The communists, followers of Marx, believed that the capitalists would never give up power willingly. They must be violently overthrown. In our time, these terms have been trivialized or forgotten. The word socialist is often used as an epithet without regard to its true or historic meaning. We forget that there was a time when socialists had real political power. In 1924, for example, Fighting Bob La Follette ran for president on the Progressive Socialist Farmer Labor ticket and won 16% of the popular vote. That's 1 out of 6 votes. And he carried Wisconsin. So you people in Wisconsin, there's one for you. Now that we have the milieu, let's turn to Dorothy Day. She was born into a middle-class Protestant family in 1897. They moved around a lot. Her father was a journalist and writer. As a child and youth, she wondered about the nature of poverty and sensed its injustice. She became religiously oriented, even though her family was not, in part because friends invited her to church, in part because she was a curious, voracious reader. Think Dostoevsky and Tolstoy here. She attended the University of Illinois starting at age 16 for 2 years. There, she rejected both religion and her upbringing, beginning an association with radical groups. She became a journalist herself, mostly working for left-wing publications. She had a passion for the workers and the destitute. She walked the picket lines during strikes. She was not a Marxist herself, but had friends throughout the left. She considered herself at the time closest to the syndicalists. In her 20s, she met Forster Batterham, who became her lover. The relationship was doomed. She became more interested in Catholicism, while he, a staunch atheist, thought it nonsense. When their infant daughter was baptized, Day decided to be baptized herself. Neither Church nor Forster could then tolerate them living together unmarried, so they separated. Now Catholic, she continued writing for left-leaning publications. To synthesize these viewpoints, she studied the Church's teaching on labor and capital. Her autobiography in particular mentions the encyclical Rerum Novarum, which is concerned with relieving the poverty of the working class. In December 1932, in the depths of the Great Depression, she met the activist Peter Moran. Together they founded the Catholic Worker Movement. They first started the newspaper, Catholic Worker, which they sold for a penny on New York street corners. They advocated a Christ-centered approach to working class distress. They established what they called hospitality houses, which were soup kitchens and shelters for the destitute and downtrodden, and distribution points for clothing and other necessities. Moran advocated going back to the land, so the movement purchased farms where people could live communally. By the way, all these things still exist. There are 9 Catholic worker hospitality houses in the Bay Area alone. There are no admissions tests for these services. You are not required to be a Catholic in good standing to receive them. The Catholic worker movement was anarchist in its outlook. It did not look to the state to provide relief. So they were not friends of the New Deal. Politically, it was pacifist. Economically, it backed a distributist model, which advocates that the world's productive assets should be widely owned. Distributism is a middle ground between capitalism and state socialism. In unbridled capitalism, ownership tends to concentrate in the hands of the wealthy, while state socialism advocates for state ownership of the means of production. In these regards, the Catholic worker often came into conflict with the larger church. For example, it, even though anti-war, tended to sympathize with the Republicans in the Spanish Civil War, while the church sided with the nationalists. The church often aligned with moneyed interests, while the Catholic worker aligned with the working class. Okay, with that bit of background, I want to take a look at today's gospel reading. Verse 32, NIV translation. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people from one another. RSV translation. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate them. A question. Do the sheep and goats represent individuals or nations? The answer seems to be yes. There are scholars who argue for either or both. Notice something else in this story. Both the sheep and the goats are surprised. The sheep were just out there doing good things all day long and not worrying about who they did them for. And the goats just didn't care. Neither had any idea that there were rewards or consequences for their behavior. And that begs the question, what makes us do things? Self-interest? Compulsion from authorities? Do we do things just because they're good? Why did Dorothy Day do the things she did? Why did she care for the impoverished and the destitute? So consider for a moment the word compassion. We ultimately get this from Latin. It means suffering with. I think this is a fundamental human trait. We see this when a mother instinctively comforts a fallen child, or when a friend reaches out to someone who is grieving. We see pain and we respond. And I think this is at root what is going on with the sheep in our story. They don't live working for points. They just do things instinctively. And the goats, maybe there was a wiring problem, or maybe they just learned to be selfish. I think the Dorothy days of this world are rooted in compassion, and I believe this comes first. I'm sure that many of our activist friends, anarchists and socialists and even communists, atheists, Jew and Christian, were also ultimately driven by compassion. I think that in Day's case, her compassion bore its greatest fruit once she was nourished by the light of Christ, who in dying on the cross showed the greatest compassion for us all. I love this idea of compassion. It brings me hope. I want to end with some words my daughter wrote. In her eulogy for her mother, she said, "In a world that seems so fractured and frightening, I hope that you are able to love your neighbor, even and especially when you don't understand them. Amen."